The sea winds howled around Dragonstone, lifting the banners of House Targaryen in a furious dance of crimson and black. The great fortress of ancient Valyrian stone perched atop a smoking mountain, its dark walls shaped by sorcery and dragonflame countless centuries past. Here, far from the decimated peninsula that birthed them, the Targaryens had stood watch over the narrow sea ever since the doom consumed Valyria. But unlike in another turning of the wheel, where Aegon the Conqueror once turned his gaze westward and set his dragons loose upon Westeros, this time, the Targaryens remained anchored to their island stronghold. Rooted by pride, caution, and an unexpectedly flourishing dominion of the waves, they never launched that fateful conquest of the Seven Kingdoms. Instead, they became masters of the narrow sea and beyond, forging a maritime empire the likes of which had not been seen since the height of old Valyria's glory. In the smoky courtyard of the fortress, a young princess named Rhaenys Targaryen clutched the hilt of a Valyrian steel dagger as she sparred with her brother. The clang of steel echoed off the carved dragon gargoyles that lined the walls. Behind her, a pair of dragons soared on the updrafts that coiled around Dragonstone's towers. Their shadows, long and serpentine, rippled over the walls and across the yard. In the distance, gulls screeched, and the sea churned restlessly, as though it shared in the Targaryen hunger for movement, for action, for dominion over all it surveyed. The sibling she faced was Daeron Targaryen, lean and swift, a youth with eyes as violet as the sky at dusk. He moved with the grace of someone who had spent just as much time at sea as on land, stepping nimbly on the worn cobblestones that had felt the tread of Targaryen boots for over a century. Their father, Jaehaerys, the Sea-Scarred, as some called him, had insisted that none of his children grow soft, that they learn not only the ways of the sword but the ways of the ship. They were to be an amphibious breed of dragonlords, forging a balance between the old Valyrian pride in dragon riding and the new reality that the world was as vast by water as it was by land. An observer might see these two Targaryen heirs and assume they were preparing for a war on Westeros. But that notion had died with their ancestors, snuffed out by the memory of how the Valyrians had spread themselves too thin, how they failed to see the dangers of expansion until the doom came. House Targaryen resolved never to repeat those mistakes. Conquest by sea demanded vigilance, cunning, and the ability to bend an unpredictable realm to one's will. Over the generations, they had built their mastery of naval arts, forging alliances with the seafaring peoples of Essos and dominating trade routes from Pentos to the Summer Isles. While brother and sister circled each other, swords raised, the wind carried the roar of the dragons overhead. One was a slender, cobalt-scaled drake named Silverian, with eyes that gleamed like molten gold. The other, a formidable beast older by decades, was Meraxes, a name resurrected from Targaryen lore, whose scales were pale silver streaked with black. Both dragons symbolized the Targaryen hold on the seas, though ironically they rarely had to use dragonfire in their maritime dominion. The Targaryens had learned that the presence of dragons alone was often enough to quell rebellions and keep trade flowing in their favor. On the ramparts overlooking the sea, King Jaehaerys stood with his cloak whipping behind him. His hair was silver-white, neatly tied back, and his eyes were alight with the reflection of the setting sun dancing upon the waves. Beside him was his queen, Alysanne Velaryon, whose own ancestral ties to the sea ran deep through the blood of Driftmark. The Velaryons had long been the chief captains and admirals of Targaryen fleets, forging a unity of dragon and ship that made House Targaryen's maritime empire possible. Much had happened under Jaehaerys' rule. Ports in the stepstones had been seized, shipping lanes established, and fortresses erected on strategic isles. The wealth that poured into Dragonstone was vast, though not as ostentatious as some might imagine. The Targaryens preferred to maintain an aura of aloofness, letting the mysteries of their island fortress and the memory of Valyria do the talking. He traced a finger along the rough stone of the parapet, half listening to the clash of steel below. As a king who preferred to settle on the quarterdeck rather than a throne, Jaehaerys often felt uneasy when forced to spend too many weeks on land. He was the one who had captained the flagship Sunfire when his father had still reigned, driving deep into the Basilisk Isles to uproot pirates that threatened Targaryen shipping. Those who tested the Targaryens soon discovered that their power was not merely in dragons but in swift longships armed with scorpion bolts and crews unwavering in loyalty. Each time an enemy attempted to raid Targaryen shipping, a dragon rider would appear in the sky, ensuring that the scattered pirate fleets would never again unify. And so the Targaryens had remained, lords of Dragonstone, lords of the sea, content with an empire that stretched across waters and tethered myriad ports to their dominion. Westeros, though vast, fractured into 7 kingdoms, was not their prime target. Yet it was always close, always visible as a dark line across the western horizon on a clear day. There were times in the past when various Targaryen monarchs had considered crossing the narrow sea to bring those kingdoms to heel, but after each round of debate, they always came to the same conclusion. A war on land would require a staggering commitment, one that might uproot the delicate balance of their maritime empire. The ports they held, from Tyrosh to Sunspear, from the stepstones to the mouth of the Blackwater, were far more profitable. Why trade the wind in their sails for the dust of 1,000 roads? On this evening, the thought returned to Jaehaerys as he gazed westward. Storm's End lay out there, an imposing seat of House Baratheon. Further north, ships from the Vale or the Riverlands occasionally dared the waters, though mostly for trade and not for conflict. Westeros was not unified. The idea of unification had never been forced upon them by Dragonfire. Instead, the Starks reigned in the north, the Lannisters in the west, the Gardeners still held the Reach, the Martells the deserts of Dorne, and the Baratheons the Stormlands. The Iron Islands remained restless, menacing shipping lanes, but ironically they seldom threatened the Targaryens beyond petty raids. Each time they did, a wing of Targaryen war galleys and a single dragon swiftly burned their longships to the waterline. All these realms existed in a shifting network of alliances, trade treaties, and occasional border skirmishes, while the Targaryens mostly watched from their fortress and ensured that commerce across the narrow sea remained profitable, and theirs to control. The faintest of smiles curved across Jaehaerys' lips. Let them fight among themselves. House Targaryen's business was with the open ocean, with the ports of Essos, and with the countless exotic kingdoms that dotted the map far beyond Westeros. He turned away and descended the stair to the courtyard, reaching the training square just as his daughter lunged at her brother. Rhaenys' blade scored a glancing strike against Daeron's upper arm. The prince hissed and took a step back, lips parting in a grin even as he felt the sting. He saluted his sister with the blade, acknowledging the point. Rhaenys lowered her weapon and bowed respectfully, the red of her leather armor glimmering in the torchlight. When she turned, the two spotted their father in his black and gold finery. "Your forms are improving," Jaehaerys said, nodding to them both. "A clean strike. Daeron, do not lean too far forward on your thrusts. That gave your sister the opening." Daeron bowed his head, though a spark of pride still brightened his eyes. "I will remember, father." Rhaenys sheathed her practiced sword. "You taught us the art of the blade so that we might not only defend ourselves but also command respect, whether aboard a ship or behind palace walls," she said. "We would serve you and the realm best if we were allowed to do more than train." Jaehaerys quirked an eyebrow. "The two of you have time yet. Patience is a virtue on the open sea. Rash decisions lead to foundered ships. Soon enough, each of you will captain your own vessel and lead men into waters unknown. But you are not grown yet. Only 3 moons past your 16th name day, my fierce daughter." Rhaenys' frustration simmered, but she bowed her head, feigning the submissive posture expected of her. She was aware, however, that her father had once embarked on his first campaign at 16 himself, hunting pirates near the stepstones. The difference was that, back then, House Targaryen had been struggling to assert dominance over an unruly sea. Now, it was a power unmatched in maritime affairs, and perhaps Jaehaerys did not feel the same urgency to test his children in blood and salt. Daeron, slightly older, with a narrower face and a quicksilver grin, stepped forward. "Might we at least sail to Driftmark next moon? I hear Lord Corlys Velaryon has completed a new ship. He calls her Sea Wraith." Jaehaerys' eyes gleamed, but he maintained his regal composure. "I have heard of that vessel. It will be the fastest in our fleet, if Lord Corlys is correct." Yes, I will allow you both to sail with me to Driftmark for the launching. It should be a spectacle well worth the trip." Rhaenys and Daeron exchanged a grin. Though the Targaryen siblings sometimes bickered, their bond was strong, and they both shared that insatiable wanderlust for the ocean. While the fortress of Dragonstone was their seat and heritage, the rolling deck of a ship was what truly called to them. Each time they embarked, they felt that primal Targaryen thrill, a reminder that their lineage was half magic, half steel, and half brine. By the time the siblings sheathed their swords and departed, the sky was sliding from pink to dark purple. Jaehaerys lingered a moment, his thoughts drifting to the seas beyond. He remembered the rumors of a new pirate haven rising near the coast of Sithorios. Then there were the always shifting allegiances in the free cities, Lys, Myr, Tyrosh. The Triarchy might be stirring again, as it had decades ago when the Targaryens first established dominion over the stepstones. And all the while, Westeros remained that massive, many-faced land just out of reach, fragmented but not entirely powerless. The Lannisters had a considerable fleet in Lannisport, the Ironborn were unpredictable, and the Redwynes of the Arbor boasted the largest private fleet in the known world. It was a puzzle, but he did not believe the Seven Kingdoms would unify and challenge Targaryen sea power. Not unless some visionary lord or king rose among them to unify them under one banner. He turned his gaze to the east. The narrow sea might be the Targaryens' private domain, but it connected them to the vast oceans beyond. The Summer Sea, the Jade Sea, and unknown waters swirling around Ulthos. There was always more to explore, more charts to be drawn, more potential trade routes to be secured. And as each wave rolled in, each tide that lapped at the black shores of Dragonstone seemed to whisper, "Expand. Keep going. There is more beyond the horizon." When the final light vanished and the night sky was pricked by stars, Jaehaerys made his way through the winding corridors to his private solar, where he removed his cloak and poured a goblet of Arbor gold. The taste was sweet on his tongue. He reflected on the negotiations he needed to finalize with the Archon of Tyrosh, who grumbled about high tariffs for ships passing through Targaryen-controlled routes. Tariffs were the lifeblood of their empire now. Where once their ancestors had collected taxes from new conquests and erected keeps on foreign soil, now they derived prosperity through controlling straits, harbors, and cargo holds. The archons and magisters of the free cities learned to pay or risk seeing their ports suffer. Still, it was a delicate balancing act. The Targaryens needed stable trade, not constant war, if they were to maintain their ascendancy. He thought, too, of the rumors of Ironborn reavers sailing farther south with each passing season, perhaps forging alliances with pirates in the stepstones. A wave of annoyance trickled through him at the prospect of dealing with the Iron Islands again. Perhaps it was time to demonstrate Targaryen might anew, to quell these smaller threats before they became real problems. He nodded to himself. Yes, a show of force would be prudent in the coming year, perhaps with the new Sea Wraith leading the vanguard. And he would bring a dragon or two as well, to make certain no illusions remained in the minds of would-be rebels. While he mused, the flickering candles cast shadows of wings upon the walls, reflections of dragons from the skies overhead, or perhaps illusions born of the dancing flame. Felt almost like an omen. Jaehaerys smiled faintly, remembering the old saying, "Dragons do not have omens. They are omens." He sipped the wine again, allowing the taste and warmth to seep into him. The future beckoned, as vast and as uncertain as the open sea. And that was precisely why House Targaryen thrived. Morning brought salt-laden gusts and the glow of the sun cresting over the sea. Rhaenys stood on a balcony outside her chambers, hands gripping the stone rail as she watched the white spray of waves crash against Dragonstone's black rocks. She had dreamed of sailing again, of commanding her own ship, prow heading into uncharted waters. There were maps in her chambers full of strange silhouettes, outline after outline of distant coasts, each labeled with cryptic Valyrian glyphs. She wanted to fill in those blank spaces. Tales of far-flung explorers, rumored isles filled with spices, gems, or monstrous beasts. These were the things that excited her more than presiding over petty feuds in a courtyard. She turned at the sound of footsteps. Daeron approached, his hair still tousled from the wind, a wry smile on his lips. "Sister, are you dreaming of sails again?" She nodded. "As always, you know me too well." He joined her, leaning on the railing. His eyes scanned the horizon. "Father mentioned we might sail to Driftmark soon. That is a start. Perhaps we can persuade him to push farther, out into the summer sea. We have allies in Volantis who might welcome an official visit." Rhaenys' gaze dipped to the courtyard, where the fortress staff prepared barrels for shipment. "Yes, or even beyond Volantis. Why not continue to Karth or the Basilisk Isles? I wish to see what lies in the far reaches of Essos, perhaps even beyond the Jade Gates." He smiled. "You have the soul of an adventurer." She brushed a strand of silver hair behind her ear. "Our house came here as refugees after the Doom, or so the histories say. Dragonstone was an outpost, yet we have made it an empire by turning our eyes to the water. If we could see more, if we could trade with the distant lands no one else dares to reach, that might raise our power to new heights." Daron laughed softly. "You sound like a would-be conqueror. Only your hunger is for knowledge and commerce, not for crowning yourself Queen of Westeros." She smirked. "Westeros is a distant thought. I leave it to father and mother to juggle the alliances needed to keep the narrow sea under our control. But if the day comes that the lords of Westeros unite and challenge us, I hope we'll be so strong at sea that it will be futile for them to fight. They can keep their endless fields and stony mountains. The oceans belong to us." They stood together in companionable silence, the wind tangling their hair. Overhead, a dragon's roar echoed, sending a thrill through them both. They were Targaryens, children of dragons, but the sea was their territory. Their hearts quickened at the thought of new journeys on the horizon. That same morning, word arrived from the south. A Lyseni merchant flotilla had been attacked in the Stepstones, presumably by pirates. The newly proclaimed prince of the Stepstones, some brash Selsail lord, claimed authority over the isles and demanded tolls from any ship passing through. Rumor had it he had a handful of reavers from the Iron Islands among his crew, savage men who knew how to navigate rocky straits and vanish among crags. 3 Lyseni galleys had been taken, their crews slaughtered or enslaved. When Jaehaerys heard, he summoned his council in the Great Hall, a cavernous chamber where pillars were carved in the likeness of dragons coiling upward. Torches flickered along the walls, casting wavering shapes across the black stone floor. The small council of House Targaryen consisted of seasoned admirals, quartermasters, a handful of spymasters versed in the tongues of Essos, and a few wise scholars from the Citadel who had chosen to serve under the Targaryen banner rather than remain in Old Town. Queen Alysanne presided beside the king, dressed in subtle elegance, a golden net shimmering in her silver hair. "It seems we have another upstart," Jaehaerys said, tapping a finger on the table. A map was spread before them, detailing the stepstones with cunning accuracy, each rocky outcrop, each narrow channel. The Targaryen sigil was marked on certain isles that they considered under their control. This so-called prince fancies himself the master of the straits. His ambition will cost him dearly. The master of ships, Ser Harlan Sunglass, cleared his throat. "My liege, the stepstones are rife with hidden coves and labyrinthine passages. It is difficult for large fleets to navigate, but we have enough smaller galleys to flush him out. With your leave, we can dispatch a force, perhaps led by Lord Corrus's new ship, the Sea Wraith." Murmurs of agreement circled the council. A young spymaster, Caro Volantine, spoke in a voice as quiet as a whisper. "Rumor also suggests the Triarchy might be sending covert support to this Selsail. Myr and Lys have ever been fractious, but sometimes they find a use in petty warlords to harass Targaryen shipping. We must strike swiftly, or we risk emboldening them." Jaehaerys folded his hands on the table. "Then it is decided. We will not tolerate any threat to our domain in the Stepstones. Ser Harlan, assemble a force of 6 war galleys, each with seasoned captains, and have them ready to sail within 3 days. And yes, let the Sea Wraith join them once it is launched. A demonstration of her maiden power would be wise. I will accompany them on my flagship. We will root out this so-called prince." Queen Alysanne placed a hand on his forearm, her voice poised yet firm. Take at least one dragon rider with you. Rumors of dragons serve as a strong deterrent, but the actual presence of one is worth 1,000 rumors. Agreed, Jaehaerys said. He glanced around. Where is Rhaenys? She and Daeron went to the harbor at dawn, Alysanne replied. Likely to inspect the ships. A ghost of a smile played on the king's lips. I shall bring one of them. Daeron rides Merax as well. A single pass above the stepstones will remind these pirates why they should fear House Targaryen. Thus it was settled. Soon, the fortress bustled with preparations. Barrels of supplies were rolled onto ships, ballista bolts stacked, sails checked and repaired. Sailors sharpened their swords, exchanging excited jests. For all the experience the Targaryen navy had in policing these waters, each new campaign brought a flush of camaraderie. An anticipation. The black and crimson banner would fly high, proclaiming that the seas were not a place for rebellion against dragonkind. On the morning of departure, the sun lit the sea with a sheen like molten gold. The Targaryen fleet stretched out in the harbor, war galleys and swift longships rocking gently. Jaehaerys strode down the docks in full splendor, wearing a black surcoat emblazoned with the red three-headed dragon. A gilded breastplate protected his chest, shaped to resemble scaled dragon skin. Men bowed as he passed, while dockworkers scrambled to finalize last-minute tasks. He paused to admire the lines of the Sea Wraith anchored at the front. Lord Corlys Velaryon stood aboard her deck, a tall man with silver-streaked hair tied back in a knot, wearing a short cape of sea green. When he caught sight of the king, he swept into a respectful bow. "Your Grace, she is ready," Lord Corlys declared proudly, patting the polished railing. The Sea Wraith was slender, with a reinforced prow shaped into a snarling sea dragon's head, and its hull was rumored to be coated in a special pitch that reduced barnacle growth and made her glide faster through the waves. Jaehaerys nodded in approval. "She looks to be a true masterpiece, my lord. I trust she will serve us well against these pirates." Rhaenys and Daeron stood side by side on the dock, watching their father speak with Lord Corlys. Rhaenys felt her heart leap at the prospect of sailing aboard such a marvel. She leaned closer to Daeron. "I wish I could take her helm," she whispered. "I want to feel her movement under my command." Daeron arched an eyebrow. "Someday. For now, let us be content that we will be part of the fleet." True to his word, Jaehaerys insisted Daeron ride Meraxes as part of the expedition. Rhaenys would sail aboard another war galley, the Dragon's Claw, to observe the battle firsthand, but it was Daeron who would take to the skies. As they readied to depart, Daeron climbed to the high causeway atop the fortress where Meraxes awaited. The dragon, massive and fearsome, lowered its neck to allow the prince to mount. In a rush of powerful muscle and a gust of wind, they soared, the sun glinting off Meraxes' scales. Daeron circled once above the fleet in a show of draconic might, sending cheers up from the sailors, before heading south to scout the waters near the stepstones. The king's flagship, the Sunfire, raised its anchor next. Jaehaerys stood on the quarterdeck, commanding a pristine view of the entire harbor. Behind him, loyal knights and ship's officers scurried to man the rigging. Cannons did not exist in this world, but the ship's ballistae were as fearsome as any bombard, and scorpion bolts were carefully stowed, ready to be fired at any sign of trouble. One by one, the war galleys peeled away from the docks in perfect formation. Oars dipped in unison, sails caught the wind, and the Targaryen fleet moved out under the watchful gargoyles of Dragonstone's towers. Rhaenys stood by the railing of the Dragon's Claw, the spray on her face thrilling her every sense. Freedom, she thought. This was freedom and power. They sailed through calm waters at first, the coastline of Westeros visible to the right as a faint smudge of greens and browns. To the left, the open sea stretched toward Essos. Gulls wheeled overhead, diving for the froth churned up by the ship's wakes. Yet as they neared the stepstones, the atmosphere changed. The sea became choppier, the wind picking up, flurries of spume dancing in the air. The stepstones themselves were notorious. A chain of rocky islands and islets bridging Westeros and Essos, a magnet for pirates who thrived on ambushing merchant vessels. On the third day of travel, Daeron appeared in the sky with mare axes, descending to relay his findings. The king stood at the prow of the Sunfire, listening intently while the young prince reported. "I sighted several small fleets moving among the southern isles," Daeron said, still mounted. Mare axes hovered overhead, occasionally letting out a bass rumble. "They're well hidden in coves. I counted at least 10 ships with black sails, all flying the sigil of some cell sail, a black kraken entwined with a green serpent. Possibly a new banner these reavers have devised." Jaehaerys turned to Ser Harlan, who stood nearby with a spyglass in hand. "We'll need to draw them out. They won't face us in open water if they have any sense. We can send a smaller decoy fleet or an apparent merchant convoy to lure them from hiding, then close in from multiple sides." Ser Harlan nodded, referencing the map. "There's a wide bay just past the Isle of Cormorants. The pirates might believe they can corner a merchant fleet there." The king gestured to the war galleys arrayed behind them. "Very well, let us proceed. Prince Daeron, keep mare axes aloft. Once we engage, I want you to circle above and strike if they attempt to flee." Daeron inclined his head. "As you command, father." With a nudge, he urged mare axes back into the sky, the great wings beating powerfully. By dusk, they prepared to enact their plan. Under cover of gathering darkness, 2 Targaryen galleys, stripped of most visible weaponry and disguised as merchantmen, separated from the main force. They hung lanterns that glowed like tempting beacons, hoping to attract the pirates. Meanwhile, the bulk of the Targaryen fleet maintained a careful distance behind a rocky headland, hidden from direct sight. Rhaenys, on the dragon's claw, waited anxiously by a ballista, the tension in the air crackling. She had never participated in a real naval engagement, skirmishes, yes, but nothing quite so orchestrated. Stars emerged above, mirrored by dancing reflections on the water. The disguised ships glided forward, lanterns bobbing, sails half-furled to suggest sluggish movement. An hour passed, then 2. The watchers on the Targaryen vessels scanned the horizon. Finally, shadows moved against the starlight, vessels emerging from a hidden cove, black sails ghosting across the water. They came in a wide arc, resembling hungry wolves surrounding easy prey. The signal was given, a solitary lantern wave from one of the Targaryen decoy ships. "All hands, ready?" barked Ser Harlan, and the Targaryen war galleys sprang into motion, oars digging into the sea. Sails were unfurled, the banner of the 3-headed dragon snapping in the wind. Rhaenys' heart pounded. She could just make out the shapes of pirate ships converging around the decoys. Then a whistle from the prow of the dragon's claw signaled the ballista crews to load and aim. A sudden whoosh, burning pitch-laden bolts flared across the darkness, slicing toward the pirate vessels. An uproar of shouts and curses carried across the water, followed by the crash of wood as at least one projectile found its mark. The illusions of merchant ships fell away as the decoys swung out their concealed ballistae. They launched counterfire, creating confusion in the pirate ranks. The pirates tried to turn, but it was too late. The Targaryen fleet surged, cutting off escape routes. From her vantage, Rhaenys saw the silhouettes of the enemy ships more clearly now. Smaller, lightly armored, designed for quick raids. They were no match for the heavier Targaryen galleys in a direct confrontation. Yet pirates could be desperate and cunning. Arrows whistled through the air, some clattering against the sides of Targaryen vessels. One stuck in the mast near Rhaenys, quivering. She yanked it free and tossed it aside, adrenaline surging. Across the dark water, she glimpsed steel glinting. Men yelled as grappling hooks flew, intent on boarding. Her own ship's crew readied pikes and crossbows to repel them. Rhaenys, though a princess, was not about to cower. She unsheathed her sword, feeling the weight in her hand. The stench of smoke and salt mingled. Lantern light and flaming arrows lent a hellish glow to the battle. Suddenly, a roar so loud it seemed to vibrate the air. Mare axes descended from the sky, releasing a torrent of dragonfire that illuminated the scene in horrifying brilliance. The pirates shrank back. 1 or 2 of their vessels caught fire at once, the sails igniting in an orange conflagration that lit the entire bay. Men screamed, some leaping overboard to escape the flames. Daeron guided the dragon with precision, ensuring he did not incinerate any Targaryen ships. Wherever the greatest cluster of enemy vessels tried to rally, Meraxes dived, belching fire that turned the water's surface into a reflection of pure carnage. But not all enemies surrendered easily. Some pirate captains, spurred by fear or fury, pressed the attack. One small swift sloop managed to dart through the Targaryen lines, ramming into the flank of a war galley. Boarding planks dropped, and savage raiders swarmed aboard. Rhaenys saw them from the deck of the Dragon's Claw and shouted, urging her captain to come alongside and provide aid. As they maneuvered, Targaryen crossbowmen loosed bolts that thudded into the pirates. The night air filled with the tang of blood, the reek of pitch, and the thunder of men clashing in close combat. On the king's flagship, the Sunfire, Jaehaerys stood at the prow, sword in hand, directing the fight through shouted orders. He was no stranger to battles at sea. He maintained discipline among his men, ensuring they would not chase smaller pirate craft into dangerous shoals. Instead, they methodically crushed each cluster of enemy ships, employing superior numbers and skill. Every Targaryen galley was armed and prepared for boarders, manned by well-trained sailors loyal to the crown. The tide swiftly turned. The pirates, seeing the unstoppable might of a coordinated Targaryen fleet and the horrifying presence of a dragon overhead, began to break. Some ships fled for the labyrinth of islands, sails tearing in the scramble. But they found Targaryen pursuit relentless. Scorpion bolts shot out, punching holes in hulls or snapping masts. Fire blossomed across the waves, reflecting in the eyes of those who still lived to witness it. Rhaenys exhaled sharply when the last enemy ship either surrendered or burned. The stepstones' waters were littered with wreckage, drifting bodies, and shattered timbers. Overhead, Meraxes let out another roar before gliding back toward the fleet, smoke rising from the dragon's jaws. The Targaryens had made their statement. At dawn, the Targaryen vessels combed through the aftermath. Survivors were taken prisoner. Grim-faced men shackled on deck, their eyes hollow. Some spat curses, others begged for mercy. Word spread that a cunning sell-sail who called himself the Prince of the Stepstones had been slain on his burning flagship. Ironborn reavers, identified by their tattoos and harsh accents, were found among the captured, though their so-called leader was nowhere in sight. Jaehaerys stood on the deck of the Sunfire, surveying the conclusion of the fight. Rhaenys and Daeron arrived in a small boat, stepping onto the flagship's deck to present their father with the spoils. Daeron's expression was grim but resolute. Rhaenys, though flushed with the thrill of battle, felt a pang of sympathy for the bodies drifting in the sea. Such violence was necessary, she reminded herself, if they were to maintain their power over these waters. "Well fought," Jaehaerys said, his voice carrying. Men cheered around them, though they were weary from the long night. "Let this serve as a warning to any who would try to harass honest shipping in our domain. House Targaryen does not tolerate outlaws on the sea." In the days that followed, the Targaryens scoured the stepstones, destroying hidden pirate coves and setting garrisons on key isles to ensure no immediate resurgence. Lord Corlys Velaryon proudly tested the Sea Wraith in these tight waters, demonstrating the ship's speed in chasing down the last remnants of the pirate fleet. Overhead, Daeron and Meraxes flew repeated patrols, a living symbol of Targaryen vigilance. After the stepstones were purged, the fleet made for driftmark to refit and rest. Lord Corlys hosted a lavish feast to celebrate their victory. Inside the high hall of driftmark, tapestries of seafaring exploits lined the walls. A mosaic on the floor depicted Valyrian ships in swirling blue tiles. Jaehaerys sat at the place of honor, flanked by Queen Alysanne and Lord Corlys. Rhaenys and Daeron sat beside them, dressed in freshly cleaned finery, trying not to show their exhaustion from the long days of battle and travel. Servants brought forth platters of lobster, crab, roast fish stuffed with lemons and herbs, and great steaming bowls of mussels in white wine. The hall filled with the mingled scents of the sea and the clamor of noble lords, knights, and sailors celebrating. Wine flowed freely, Toasts were made to the king and the might of House Targaryen. Rhaenys accepted compliments on her bravery, though in truth, her role had not been as central as Daemon's. Still, she smiled politely at each well-wisher, deflecting undue praise. When the hall's noise became a roar of conversation and merriment, Jaehaerys turned to his children. "You both served well. I am proud of you." Daeron smiled. It was exhilarating to fight from Merax's back, though the stench of burning ships is far from pleasant. Rhaenys sipped her wine, remembering the chaotic sights and sounds. "I wonder how many times we must do this," she mused softly. "Each year, there seems to be some new pirate threat or upstart warlord in these isles. We vanquish them, but they resurface. Is there no permanent solution?" Jaehaerys nodded in acknowledgement. "It is the nature of these waters, I fear. The stepstones are scattered and hard to patrol constantly. The best we can do is maintain a garrison and respond swiftly to any sign of piracy. As long as trade flows, there will always be some who seek quick plunder." Daeron asked, "And Westeros? Shall we see any reaction to our show of force?" A wry glint appeared in Jaehaerys' eyes. "Some lords might grumble about Targaryen might so close to their shores, but I doubt they will act. Most rely on trade themselves, and they benefit when we clear the sea of pirates. Still, we must remain watchful. The day may come when one of their kings or queens decides our presence is a threat." In a corner of the hall, bards began a haunting melody about ancient Valyria, strumming lutes and chanting in High Valyrian. Conversation quieted momentarily as people listened to the distant echo of a lost empire's grandeur. Flickering torchlight danced over the mosaic on the floor, giving the impression of waves that moved and shimmered. Rhaenys was drawn into the music, feeling a subtle longing. Valyria was lost to them, but it lived on in House Targaryen. And here they were, forging a new identity not as conquerors on land but as undisputed rulers of the sea. As the feast wound down, Lord Corlys rose to make a toast. "To the king who brings order to our waters, and to his noble house who tames the seas with dragons and ships, may the tides ever favor House Targaryen." The hall erupted in cheers. Cups banged on tables, and a wave of wine was tossed back in salute. The Targaryens exchanged looks among themselves, each aware of the precarious foundation that supported their empire. It was not built upon farmland and castles, nor upon the submission of great houses across an entire continent. Rather, it was woven through the channels of commerce and maritime might. So long as they commanded the waves, they need bow to no power on land. Yet the sea could be fickle, as tempestuous as a dragon's temper. After the celebrations, Rhaenys wandered outside Driftmark's hall, finding a quiet walkway overlooking the bay. Lanterns glowed at intervals, reflecting in the still waters below. She leaned on the balustrade, mind turning over the question she had asked her father. Could the Targaryens bring lasting peace to these seas, or was perpetual vigilance their only path? She heard footsteps and turned to see Daeron approach. His face was illuminated by the soft lantern light, giving his features an almost ethereal cast. They stood in silence a moment, listening to the distant hush of water against the docks. He smiled gently. "Thinking," she nodded. "Always. I wonder if we can truly stop these endless raids and battles. If we declared ourselves the protectors of these waters, forging alliances with the free cities, guaranteeing safe passage, well, we do that already, in a sense, but perhaps we could do more." Daeron considered her words. "You speak of forging an actual maritime realm that spans across all major ports, doesn't rely solely on force but on a shared interest in keeping the seas free of raiders?" "Something like that," she said. "It would require the cooperation of Tyrosh, Lys, Pentos, even Bravos, maybe, and the Summer Isles if we push that far. Imagine if we brokered a grand maritime peace, with House Targaryen at the helm." His violet eyes flickered with intrigue. "Father has always negotiated trade pacts, but a wide-ranging alliance might be a new concept. House Targaryen would be the anchor, and the threat of our dragons would uphold the treaties. It could work, in time, if we carefully manage the ambitions of each city." Rhaenys sighed. "It sounds like a dream, I know. Yet part of me yearns to see a great golden age of seafaring. More exploration, trade, discovery, less blood on the waves. Perhaps that is naive. Daeron placed a hand on her shoulder. You have a vision. That's not naivete. It may prove difficult, likely more so than any war of conquest, but it might shape the future. Dragonstone could be the beacon of a new order. And you, sister, could be the one to chart that course. She glanced at him, touched by his faith in her. Perhaps. Let's see how father reacts if I suggest forging alliances across the summer sea. He might think me too idealistic. They fell silent, each imagining the possibilities. Far from them, a single bright star shone in the night sky, its reflection shimmering in the dark water below. Sometimes, the path forward was like steering a ship by starlight. You had only a distant glimmer to guide you, uncertain if it might lead to new shores or hidden reefs. The next day, Rhaenys gathered the nerve to speak privately with her father in Lord Corrus's solar, a room lined with charts and instruments of navigation. There, Jaehaerys stood with a pair of admirals, discussing the timeline for fortifying the stepstones. She waited until the admirals departed, then approached her father, who was studying a chart of the summer sea. You have a question or a suggestion? I can tell, he said without looking up. His intuition rarely failed him. He traced a line along the chart, trade routes that curved around the southern coast of Westeros and onward to Old Town and beyond. Rhaenys took a breath. I wanted to discuss our future expansions. We've dealt a blow to the pirates, yes, but for how long? Another wave will surface eventually. What if, instead of simply hunting them down each time, we try to unify the major port powers in a mutual pact against piracy? If we can align Bravos, Pentos, Myr, Tyrosh, even Old Town, the Arbor, and others who rely on sea trade, then any pirates would face a united front. Jaehaerys glanced up. It is an ambitious idea. We have mutual agreements with many of these cities, but not a single consolidated alliance. You propose a massive network of treaties. Yes, one that would make it clear that any threat to the sea is a threat to all signatories. We would be recognized as leaders in maintaining that order. Our navy and dragons would be the deterrent. He studied her face, assessing her conviction. The FRE cities are often at each other's throats. Bravos has rivalries with Pentos. Lys and Myr bicker constantly. Gathering them under one pact will be akin to taming a nest of vipers. I know it won't be simple, but the alternative is endless skirmishes, each city expecting us to solve their problems while some secretly fund pirates to harm their rivals. If we can quell those rivalries in the name of open seas, we could limit piracy's lifeblood. Jaehaerys finally pushed the chart aside and gave her his full attention. And you believe we should lead this because we have the largest navy and dragons to back it? She nodded. Yes, we're neutral in many of their disputes, at least relatively so, because we don't hold major tracts of land in Essos. Our seat is in Westeros, but we don't meddle in their internal conflicts. They might trust us or fear us enough to sign. He paced to the window, gazing out at the sea shimmering under the morning sun. For a moment he was silent. Then he spoke in measured tones. Rhaenys, you are young, but your mind is sharp. I see merit in this strategy. It could elevate House Targaryen to unprecedented influence, but it is also fraught with potential pitfalls. The free cities are proud and suspicious of each other. Some might see our proposal as an attempt to become sea tyrants. Is that so different from what they already believe? She asked softly, a half-smile touching her lips. Jaehaerys chuckled at that. Point taken. But if we appear too domineering, they'll unite against us rather than with us. We must tread carefully. He turned back to face her. Let me think on this. Perhaps we can begin by hosting a summit on Dragonstone or in one of the neutral Stepstone Isles, once it's fully under our control. I'll consult with trusted advisors, and with your mother, of course. Rhaenys felt a surge of excitement. Thank you, father. I truly believe this could reshape our future. Jaehaerys gave a small smile. We Targaryens have spent long enough stamping out petty fires. A grand alliance might indeed be the best path forward, but it will require more than steel and dragons. We'll need cunning diplomacy, In the weeks that followed, the Targaryen fleet returned to Dragonstone to rest and resupply. Daeron continued patrolling the skies on Meraxes, ensuring no immediate threat lingered. Messages were dispatched to various cities, testing the waters for such a summit. The responses were mixed. Braavos seemed mildly interested. Pentos was suspicious. Mir scoffed unless certain tariffs were reduced. Lys demanded concessions as well. It became clear that forging an alliance would be a long, careful process of negotiation. Yet Rhaenys did not lose heart. She threw herself into the task, learning from her father's master of whisperers about each city's needs and resentments, drafting letters that balanced polite enticement with subtle reminders of Targaryen might. Daeron, for his part, teased her about her new role as a diplomat. One day you're sparring with me in the courtyard. The next you're writing politely threatening letters to archons and magisters. Truly, you are forging a new path for our house, he remarked one evening. She shrugged, an amused glint in her eye. I won't pretend I'm a seasoned negotiator yet, but father allows me to take the lead on certain correspondences. Besides, if we succeed, think of how many new lands we can safely sail to. Daeron grinned. That is the real reason, isn't it? You want to sail unimpeded from here to the edge of the known world. They both laughed. If anything, his jibe was partly true. Her thirst for exploration fueled her diplomatic ambitions. But it was also a genuine desire to end the cycle of violence on the seas. She had seen enough of death, even in that one battle, to know that the cost of constant conflict was too high. Meanwhile, King Jaehaerys began drafting plans for a summit. He proposed hosting it on Driftmark, as a location somewhat removed from Dragonstone's more intimidating atmosphere. The Round Hall in Driftmark had capacity for multiple delegations, and Lord Corlys was eager to host an event that might bring further prestige to House Velaryon. Letters were sent out, inviting envoys from Braavos, Pentos, Lys, Mir, Tyrosh, even Volantis. Whether they would all attend remained uncertain. As preparations advanced, word came from Westeros of political stirrings. The Prince of Dorne, a young Corgyle scion, had expressed curiosity about forging closer ties with the Targaryens for reasons of trade. The Stormlands, under House Baratheon, supposedly bristled at Targaryen control of the stepstones, but no direct threat was made. In the north, House Stark's new generation was rumored to be forging alliances with the Arryns of the Vale, though that seemed to concern only local matters. The Lannisters, proud behind the walls of Casterly Rock, maintained a fleet in Lannisport but so far had not tested Targaryen waters. The Gardeners in the Reach focused on agriculture and trade with the free cities, preferring not to entangle themselves in maritime power struggles. Rhaenys sometimes wondered if, in another life, she or Daeron might have led dragons in a grand conquest of Westeros. The Seven Kingdoms remained divided, ripe for a conqueror with enough vision. But that was not the Targaryen path in this timeline. Their aims were turned outward across the sea, though from time to time, she found herself gazing toward Westeros, pondering what might happen if the right crisis or opportunity arose. With the summit drawing near, Rhaenys felt nerves flutter in her stomach. She was to play a key role in receiving the envoys, guiding them and hosting certain discussions, alongside her parents. On the eve of departure for Driftmark, she wandered the corridors of Dragonstone, seeking a quiet moment before the wave of negotiations would begin. Stepping into an old gallery lined with dragon skulls, she gazed at the silent remnants of her house's past might. Massive jaws curved like scythes, empty eye sockets stared. These beasts had once soared above old Valyria, then fled with the Targaryens to Dragonstone. Their descendants still lived in the skies, yet so much had changed. No longer was conquest their only calling. A rustle of footsteps sounded behind her. She turned to see her mother, Alysanne, enter. The queen approached with a gentle smile, her silver hair arranged in an elegant coif. "You're not frightened by these old bones, are you?" Alysanne asked, lightly brushing her fingers over a gargantuan thong. Rhaenys shook her head. "Not frightened, just contemplative. The skulls are a reminder of our heritage, and of what we might yet achieve or lose." Alysanne's gaze lingered on the largest skull, rumored to belong to a dragon that had died shortly after the Targaryens first settled Dragonstone. They also remind us of mortality, even for creatures as grand as dragons. Our time is fleeting, Rhaenys. Whatever we do, we should do it with purpose. Rhaenys took a breath, summoning courage. Mother, do you believe I can handle these negotiations? Father has entrusted me with much. I feel the weight of it. Alysanne smiled, placing a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. I have faith in you. Your father and I have seen your resolve, your intelligence, your understanding of what drives people. You will not be alone. We will stand by you. But it is good that you carry some nerves. It shows you understand the gravity of this summit. Rhaenys nodded, exhaling some tension. I just hope we can persuade them that a united maritime alliance is worth setting aside old grievances. Her mother's smile warmed. If it were easy, it would have been done long ago. But you have a dragon's spirit, and a dragon on the horizon is often enough to make even the proudest lords pause. They stood together for a moment in the hushed gallery. Then Alysanne gestured for them to leave. Come, we should rest. Tomorrow we sail for Driftmark, and soon we shall greet magisters and archons, each with their own labyrinth of demands. Rhaenys followed, feeling a blend of excitement and trepidation. This was a new path House Targaryen had chosen, diplomacy as a route to lasting power at sea. Beyond the castle walls, the tide rumbled in the darkness, a constant lullaby of potential and danger. Early the next day, the royal party departed for Driftmark in a smaller procession than the full might of the fleet. They took a few war galleys for security, but the journey was more ceremonial than militaristic. Daeron flew overhead on mare axes, while Jaehaerys and Alysanne sailed on the Sunfire. Rhaenys accompanied them on the Dragon's Claw, feeling a flutter in her chest when they cast off from Dragonstone's harbor. Their retinue included interpreters fluent in multiple tongues, scribes to record treaties, and a handful of household knights. Lord Corlys awaited them eagerly, having prepared the round hall and the lodgings for visiting delegations. Word had traveled quickly across the narrow sea, and the Targaryens expected at least some of the invited powers to arrive. Exactly who would come, and in what mood was anyone's guess. As they neared Driftmark, Rhaenys stood by the prow, scanning the horizon. The wind carried the brine to her nostrils, and gulls cawed overhead. The familiarity of the water soothed her. At last, they anchored in Driftmark's harbor, the banners snapping in the salty breeze. Lord Corlys himself greeted them on the docks, bowing low. Your Grace, Your Majesty, Princess Rhaenys, welcome again. The round hall is prepared to your specifications. We've received envoys from Braavos, Tyrosh, and Pentos already. Myr's galley arrived this morning. Lys and Volantis are said to be close behind. Thank you, Lord Corlys, Jaehaerys said. It appears we have a lively summit ahead. As they made their way to the round hall, Rhaenys observed the hustle of activity around Driftmark. Servants rushed to carry baggage, scribes conferred in hushed tones, captains barked orders at their crews. She glimpsed foreign dignitaries wearing silks and furs, their expressions guarded. Each had come with their own agenda. Inside the round hall, a spacious circular chamber with high windows, braziers glowed to offset the sea chill. A large round table had been placed in the center, chairs arranged for each delegation. Intricate tapestries depicting ships and sea battles adorned the stone walls, and the floor was polished limestone. Servants moved about, setting out carafes of wine and plates of fruit and cheese. Rhaenys took her seat beside her father, mother on his other side, with Daeron standing behind them in a half-guard posture. One by one, the delegations arrived. The Braavosi envoy, a solemn man with a trim beard, wore robes of purple velvet. The Pentoshi magister, fleshy and ostentatious, smirked as he surveyed the hall. Tyrosh's envoys were flamboyant, their hair dyed in vivid colors. The Myrish ambassadors were more subdued, whispering among themselves. Seats remained for the Lyseni and Volantene envoys, who had yet to arrive. Once the initial pleasantries were exchanged, Jaehaerys rose to welcome them. He spoke with regal composure, referencing the hope for a future of safer seas and mutual prosperity. Rhaenys watched the reactions, some politely applauding, some exchanging skeptical glances. And so the summit commenced, the air thick with tension and possibility. Over the following days, negotiations churned like a raging sea. Each city had demands, reductions in Targaryen tariffs, exclusive trading rights, or special privileges in certain ports. Some insisted they be recognized as co-defenders of the maritime routes, bristling at the notion that Targaryens alone would stand as protectors. More than once, the discussion grew heated, voices rising, fists pounding tables. Rhaenys found herself stepping in, employing calm logic to defuse arguments. She reminded them that a unified agreement meant benefits for all, painting vivid pictures of how the stepstones could be fully cleansed of pirates, how the trade lanes could flourish without fear, bringing wealth to each signatory. Daeron occasionally added his perspective, referencing the quick devastation he and Meraxes had wrought on the pirates. United under a single pact, we can ensure that not even the boldest raiders dare threaten our routes. Some envoys looked uneasy, as if reminded that the Targaryens had the power to incinerate their fleets if provoked. That undercurrent of fear was part of the negotiations' leverage, though Rhaenys tried not to overuse it. Fear alone was a shaky foundation for alliances. On the summit's fourth day, the envoys from Lys and Volantis arrived, apologizing for their delay due to storms or diplomatic entanglements. This added new layers of complexity. Lys, with its historical rivalry against Myr, demanded certain clauses. Volantis, proud and ancient, wanted recognition of its old imperial claims. Arguments flared anew, but Jaehaerys remained patient, guiding them with a captain's steadiness through the stormy waters of diplomacy. Each night, Rhaenys collapsed into bed, mind reeling with facts, figures, and half-made promises. A breakthrough came on the fifth night, when a compromise was tentatively reached. A centralized maritime pact, overseen by a council in which each free city had a seat, and House Targaryen would hold a permanent seat as the recognized guardian of the Straits. The Targaryens would lower certain tariffs but gain the explicit right to station galleys in strategic ports. Pirates, raiders, or any city that funded them would be declared an enemy to all signatories. The devils lay in the details. Which ports, how many galleys, how disputes would be arbitrated, and whether dragons could be used for enforcement. But it was a framework, at least a shape in the fog. After an arduous session of hammering out terms, the envoys retired for the night. Rhaenys remained behind with her parents and Daeron, staring at the draft of the agreement. Flickering candlelight played over the words inked in Valyrian glyphs and the common tongue. Her eyes burned from fatigue, but her pulse raced at what they were on the cusp of achieving. "They will bicker over each article," Jaehaerys said, massaging his temples. "But it seems we might at last have a foundation for cooperation. Once this is signed, we'll have a legal basis to demand that each city hunts pirates within their waters. If they fail to comply, we can brand them oathbreakers." Alysanne looked pleased but cautious. "We must ensure it is seen as fair, or else they'll resent us." Rhaenys allowed herself a faint smile. "If we can finalize this, it would be the first large-scale maritime alliance in living memory. It might not be perfect, but it's a step toward ensuring peace on the seas." Daeron nodded, though his gaze was on the window where the dark sea loomed beyond. "I hope it holds. We'll still need to keep a vigilant watch. But it's better to have these cities tied by treaty than left to their own devices." Jaehaerys set his quill down, regarding his children with pride. "You both have done well. Even if this treaty ends up fraying over time, at least we've shown them the possibility of collective action. Perhaps that will shift the balance." Rhaenys glanced at her father, a question in her eyes. "And Westeros? Do we approach any of their lords or kings about this alliance?" He considered. "In time, perhaps. The Ironborn are the most immediate concern, but House Greyjoy is fractious. If the king of the Iron Islands can be persuaded to sign, or at least deterred from raiding, that would be enough for now. As for the rest of Westeros, most are more focused on land-based matters. Their trade by sea is significant, but not as paramount as it is for the free cities. We'll keep lines of communication open." They adjourned, each lost in their own thoughts. For Rhaenys, the sense of forging something entirely new gave her both exhilaration and a hint of dread. If they succeeded, the seas might truly belong to House Targaryen, and all who sailed under the Alliance's banner. If they failed, a tide of resentment could rise to drown them. She vowed to see it through if it took months or years because she believed in what they could achieve. Violence would never vanish from the seas, but it could be tempered, guided, minimized. That alone was worth the struggle. On the final day of the summit, in a ceremony that drew every envoy into the round hall, the official draft of the Pact of Driftmark was presented. It spanned several parchment scrolls, each requiring multiple signatures and seals. Envoys stepped forward in turn, dipping quills into ink and affixing their city's crest. Not all did so willingly, but the momentum and the presence of Targaryen power nudged them forward. Jaehaerys signed last under the watchful eyes of his family. Then, at his gesture, Daeron lifted a small silver brazier, letting its flame symbolize the dragon's oath to uphold the pact. An air of solemnity filled the hall, as though history was being written before their eyes. When the final seal was pressed, applause rippled through the chamber. Some faces looked relieved, others cautious or displeased. Yet none dared deny that a landmark agreement had been forged. Jaehaerys stood, proclaiming House Targaryen's commitment to the pact, promising that they would remain ever vigilant against piracy and welcoming the cities as partners in maritime prosperity. Several envoys murmured polite agreement. Afterward, the envoys were invited to a final feast. Wine and sweet liquors flowed, though the mood was subdued with exhaustion. Many recognized that the real test would come when they returned to their homelands and tried to implement the pact. The next months and years would determine if this alliance held like steel or broke apart like rotten wood. Still, Rhaenys allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She drifted through the feast, exchanging pleasantries, even sharing a laugh with the Braavosi envoy over a jest about Valyrian sailors. In her mind's eye, she saw a future in which Targaryen galleys sailed unopposed from Slaver's Bay to Westeros, from the Shivering Sea to the Summer Isles, not as invaders but as respected guardians of commerce. There would be friction, always. Yet if they succeeded, it might be the crowning achievement of House Targaryen, forging an empire of trade and cooperation rather than flames and swords. When the night's revelries ended, she stepped outside once more, finding a quiet perch atop a stone parapet overlooking Driftmark's moonlit harbor. The sea stretched silver under the moon. She closed her eyes and inhaled the salt air. Dragonstone waited across the water, and beyond it, the endless horizon. Maybe one day, she would set sail with a small fleet, charting waters unknown, her path unimpeded by pirate or foe, carrying the banner of House Targaryen as a symbol of freedom of the seas. A gentle voice interrupted her reverie. "Are you enjoying the night breeze?" She turned. Daeron stood behind her, his cloak fluttering in the wind. "I am. I was just dreaming of what might come next." He nodded, joining her at the parapet. "We have a chance at a peaceful sea. I never thought I'd see so many rivals sit at a table and sign anything together." She grinned. "Nor did I, but we did it." Daeron caught her gaze, sincerity in his eyes. "You did it, Rhaenys. Father may have had the authority, but it was your initiative that set this in motion. I'm proud of you." His words made her flush slightly. She glanced at the moonlight on the water. "It's only the start. There will be trouble, I'm sure. But at St. now we have a framework." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then let us celebrate for one night. Tomorrow we return to the swirl of politics and patrolling. Tonight, we can gaze upon the sea we've begun to shape." They stood side by side in the quiet darkness. Far below, the tide lapped at the harbor's pilings. Above, a single dragon soared, dark against the moon, keeping watch. And in that serene moment, Rhaenys believed that House Targaryen, ever perched between the sky and the sea, might yet guide the world toward a dawn free of chaos on the waves. When they eventually parted, Rhaenys returned to her chambers, letting weariness claim her. Her dreams were filled with visions of ships sailing under many banners but one cause, dragons gliding overhead, and a horizon that opened into boundless possibility. There would be storms ahead, no doubt, but the Targaryens had never feared storms. They had always flown above them or sailed through them, forging their path with fire and blood, or, as now, with trade and treaties. And that was how the Targaryens remained. Not conquerors of the Seven Kingdoms, but lords of Dragonstone and masters of the sea, lighting a beacon of unity for all who braved the waves.